Ever feel like there's just so many different ideas about learning out there that it's like
Hmm.
you can't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah, totally.
We're going to take a deep dive today into a really cool area.
Yeah.
Uh, it's all about, figuring out what motivates learning, especially in higher ed.
Ooh, higher ed.
Yeah, college and beyond.
Right. Right.
You sent over some really interesting stuff. One article in particular caught my eye. It's called Building Bridges Seeking Structure and Direction for Higher Education Motivated Learning Strategy Models.
Catchy title.
Yeah, right. By Luke K. Schreier.
Okay, Friday.
Our mission today is to kind of cut through all the jargon and the complexity
Yeah, make it make sense.
and get to the heart of it. Like, what are the really valuable insights we can all take away from this?
I love that.
Yeah.
You know what really struck me about Fryer's article is this core problem he points out.
Okay.
We have all this research, right? Tons of it.
Right.
Trying to explain, how students learn what motivates them.
Like what gets them going.
Yeah, exactly. But he says these models, they often exist like islands of learning strategy investigation.
Islands.
Yeah, it's like each one is its own little thing.
Huh.
And breakthroughs on one island don't always, translate to the others.
So it's like they're not talking to each other.
Exactly.
Oh, that's a problem.
It is a problem.
Okay, so think of this deep dive as a bridge
Ooh, I like that.
between those islands.
Okay.
We're going to navigate these different ways of thinking about learning and maybe even see where some of them connect.
Find the common ground.
Yeah, find those aha moments without like totally overwhelming you with all the details.
Love it.
Now, Fryer, he talks about two main historical paths of research.
Two paths. Okay.
Can you walk us through those?
Sure. So the first one he calls the European-Australian context-embedded intention processing lineage.
Whoa, that's a mouthful.
It is a bit of a mouthful.
Okay, so context-embedded intention processing.
Right. So this one really grew out of the early work of Martin and Selye. Back in the 70s, they did some really foundational work, on how students approach reading and things like that. And then researchers like Entwistle and Biggs, they built on that,
Okay.
focusing on how students intend to learn within a specific educational setting.
So it's all about the context, the where and the why of the learning.
Exactly. It's learning, but with a big emphasis on the context.
Got it.
And this led to models like SL, which stands for Student Approaches to Learning.
That's how. Okay.
So as the name suggests, it's looking at how students approach their studies.
Makes sense.
Right.
Okay, so context and intention. That's path one.
That's path one.
What about path two?
Path two is the American processing and motivation approach.
Okay, processing and motivation.
So this one has its roots in cognitive processing research from people like Schmeck, Weinstein, Mayer.
Big names.
Yeah, thinkers who are really focused on the mental mechanics of how we learn.
Right, the nuts and bolts.
Of learns. And over time, this approach expanded to include motivation and something called self-regulated learning,
Self-regulated learning.
or SRL,
SRL, got it.
with big contributions from researchers like Pintrich.
Okay, so this path is more about what's going on inside the student's head.
Yeah, it's more about the internal processes and what's driving them to engage in those learning processes.
Okay, so we've got these two paths. One looking at the environment and the student's intentions. The other looking at the internal processes and drives.
Right. It's a pretty fundamental difference.
Yeah.
Fire also mentioned something called metacognition.
Metacognition.
Yeah, have you heard of that?
I have, but refresh my memory.
Okay, so metacognition is basically thinking about your own thinking.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's like being aware of how you learn and being able to monitor your own progress.
So like thinking about thinking.
Exactly.
Okay.
And research into this by people like Baker and Brown-Flovell, it kind of developed alongside these two main paths. This focus on self-awareness and learning it really paved the way for the later emphasis on self-regulation that we see in SRL.
Right, so we've got these two main paths and then this kind of parallel development of metacognition that feeds into self-regulation.
It all ties together.
Seems like a lot of ground covered over the years.
Yeah.
A lot of research.
Yeah, tons of research.
But Fryer, he also points out that it hasn't all been smooth sailing.
Right.
There have been some bumps in the road.
What's interesting is that despite all this work, decades of it, and tons of studies, the field has faced some criticism.
Oh, really?
Yeah, people have questioned how reliable and consistent some of these models are in predicting how well students will actually learn.
So, like, do they actually hold up in the real world?
That's the question.
Hmm.
And Fryer notes that it seems like theoretical progress has kind of stalled.
Stalled.
Yeah, and the field has become more and more fragmented.
Fragmented, like broken up.
Yeah, everyone's kind of focusing on their own specific little piece of the puzzle.
It's like everyone's got a piece of the puzzle, but they're not putting it together.
Right.
And they're not even talking to each other.
Not really.
Oh, that's a shame.
It is.
Okay, so what's the big goal of our deep dive today?
The goal is to explore this possibility of bringing these different models into a more connected conversation.
Okay, so like building those bridges
Building bridges, exactly.
between the islands.
We want to understand how they relate to each other.
Right.
Because the idea is that if we can do that, we can develop a much more complete and useful understanding of what makes for quality learning in higher education.
Especially given how fast the world is changing these days, right?
Absolutely. Higher ed is changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
We need a more holistic understanding of learning.
Okay, so let's dig into this historical split a little bit more between those European and American approaches back in the 70s and 80s.
Okay, back in the day.
What were the really key differences in their focus back then?
Well, as Fryer and Pintrich point out, the initial divergence really came down to what they were primarily trying to understand. The European-Australian ESSAL approach, as we said it, was really focused on how students tackled specific learning tasks within a given context.
Right, that's the context-embedded intention processing part.
Exactly. They wanted to know how students intended to learn in relation to their learning environment.
Okay, so like how the surroundings affect the learning.
Right.
Okay.
On the other hand, the American approach was broader, looking at processing and motivation.
Okay.
So examining the mental steps students took and what drove them to take those steps, often without the same strong emphasis on the immediate learning situation.
So one's very focused on the context and the other is more about the internal stuff.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay, and we see that difference reflected in the specific learning models that came out of each approach, right?
Absolutely.
Like SAL.
Right. So the study approaches to learning model, it became central in Europe and Australia,
Okay.
looking at things like deep and surface learning.
Deep and surface learning.
Yeah, are students trying to really understand the material or just memorize it?
Oh, okay, two different approaches.
Right, and how that relates to their goals and how they see the learning environment.
Hmm.
So it's all very much tied to that context.
Right.
In the U.S., you had models by Weinstein and Mayer, which focused on specific learning strategies,
Okay.
like memorization techniques
Right.
or connecting new information to what you already know.
Hmm.
And later, the model of domain learning, or MDL,
MVL, okay, another acronym.
which looks at how a student's interest and competence grow in a particular subject.
Okay, so that's a different focus.
It is.
It sounds like they were also looking at learning at different levels, as Fryer mentioned.
That's right.
Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. So the SLL approach often zoomed in on a particular task,
Okay,
like how a student was tackling a specific essay or problem set.
so very specific.
Very specific.
Okay.
The MDL, however, tended to take a wider view, looking at a student's developing interest and expertise across an entire field of study.
So like a whole subject area.
Exactly.
Okay, so one's very micro, one's more macro.
Yeah, you could say that.
They're looking through different lenses.
Different lenses, different zoom levels.
Now, you also mentioned self-regulated learning, or SRL.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of its own separate thing.
It's a bit of an outlier.
Yeah, how does that fit into this whole picture?
SRL is interesting because while it definitely includes how students process information, where the cognitive side of things,
Okay.
it really emerged as its own significant area of research. Researchers in SRL, they study how students take control of their own learning,
Interesting.
how they set goals, choose strategies, monitor their progress, and adapt as needed.
So it's all about the student being in the driver's seat.
Yeah, being proactive.
Okay.
What makes it distinct is that while some SRL research looks at how students regulate their learning on the specific task,
Okay.
other work examines more general patterns of self-regulation across different learning situations.
So some general.
Right, so it wasn't initially tied as closely to either the European focus on context or the American focus on broad processing.
Right. So it's like we have these two continents of learning research and then this island of SRL developing alongside.
A good analogy.
Now, Fryer brings up Pintrich's attempts to connect some of these ideas, especially between SL and SRL.
Yeah, Pintrich was a bridge builder.
Okay. What did he find?
Pintrich, in his 2004 work, he made a really valuable effort to compare these different ways of thinking about learning.
Okay.
He found some areas where the models were talking about the same things.
Okay. Some overlap.
Yeah, and others where they were focused on completely different aspects of learning.
So some agreement, some disagreement.
Right.
Okay.
He also talked about the different grain sizes, suggesting that SRL tended to look at learning in smaller chunks, like specific assignments,
Okay.
while SL looked at broader approaches to learning within a whole course or even a degree program.
So SRL is more micro.
Yeah.
SL is more macro.
That's how Pinterich saw it.
But Fryer actually challenges that idea a bit, doesn't he?
Yeah. He does. Fryer argues that the difference in focus isn't as clear-cut as Pinterich suggested.
Okay.
He points out that while SRL definitely looks at how students regulate their learning on specific tasks, there's also a lot of SRL research that examines learning at a more general level,
Okay.
like students' overall habits and approaches to learning over time.
So SRL can be macro too.
Exactly.
Okay.
Similarly, while Salas started by looking at how students approach specific tasks, it also evolved to examine their general learning styles across entire courses or even academic disciplines.
So Sowell can be macro too.
Right.
Huh. So maybe the difference isn't as big as we thought.
Maybe not.
Pinterich also had some thoughts on who these different models might be most useful for.
He did.
What were his thoughts on that?
He suggested that SL, because it's relatively straightforward and has clear implications for how you teach,
Okay.
might be more immediately helpful for instructors.
So teachers.
Right, teachers trying to improve their teaching and support student learning. He felt that SRL, with its more complex theoretical ideas, was perhaps more relevant for researchers studying the learning process itself.
So SL for teachers, SRL for researchers.
That was his thinking. But Fryer, again, he pushes back a bit on that sharp division.
Yeah.
He highlights that both SL, with its renewed focus on how students interact with specific learning tasks, and SRL, particularly the work of Vermont, on students' overall patterns of learning and self-regulation.
Right.
They both offer valuable insights that educators can use to improve their teaching.
So both models can be useful for teachers.
Exactly.
Okay, good to know.
And ultimately, Pinterich called for a robust top-down theory to really bring these different ways of thinking about learning together.
That seems like a crucial point.
It is a crucial point.
Like we need some kind of overarching framework to make sense of it all.
Exactly, and that's what Fryer is building on.
Which leads us to Fryer's central idea, perceived control.
Perceived control.
How does he see this concept as a way to link all these different areas of research?
Fryer proposes perceived control as that potential bridge.
The bridge between the islands.
Yes, the bridge. He argues that it stems from a very basic human need for competence.
Need for competence.
Yeah, that feeling that we're capable and effective in what we do.
Like we can actually accomplish things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this idea, it goes way back to the work of White in 1959.
Wow, way back.
And this need to feel competent, it's a really powerful motivator.
Yeah, it makes sense. We all want to feel like we're good at things.
Exactly.
Okay.
And from this core idea, a number of related theories about what drives us have emerged.
Okay.
Things like self-efficacy,
Self-efficacy.
which is our belief in our ability to succeed.
Oh,
Attribution theory,
attribution theory.
which is how we explain our successes and failures.
Mm.
And self-determination theory.
Self-determination theory.
The idea that we need to feel autonomous and in control of our own lives.
Okay, so lots of different theories, all stemming from this need to feel competent. And perceived control is one of those focusing specifically on our sense of agency in our learning.
Right. It's about feeling like we can actually influence what happens in our learning.
We're not just along for the ride.
Exactly. We have some control.
And Fryer focuses on perceived control because it's so directly tied to learning strategies.
It is.
Like ultimately, those strategies are about becoming more competent. Right?
Exactly. He also points out that the theory of perceived control gives us a really clear picture of how the learning environment, the strategies students use, and the results they achieve all interact with each other.
Oh, so it's like a system.
It is a system. It
Okay.
shows us how all the pieces fit together.
I like that.
And what are the specific parts of perceived control theory that make it such a good candidate for this bridging role?
Yeah, what makes it so special?
Well, Fryer highlights a few key aspects.
Okay.
First, it shows how the learning process unfolds over time with things influencing each other in a cycle.
A cycle.
Yeah, our sense of control affects what we do, which then impacts how well we do, and that in turn can change how much control we feel.
So it's a feedback loop.
Exactly.
Okay.
Second, the theory helps us understand how the learning environment,
The environment.
things like clear instructions, helpful feedback support from instructors,
Okay, yeah.
all of that can either boost or undermine a student's sense of control.
So the environment can either help or hurt.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
And third, it gives us a way to organize our thinking based on how much control students feel they have.
Okay.
from feeling helpless to feeling controlled by external factors to feeling in control themselves.
So a spectrum of control.
Yeah, and how structured they perceive the learning environment to be.
Okay, so it's not just about the student's feelings, it's also about how the environment is set up.
Right, the two things interact.
They do.
Yeah,
That sounds like it could provide that common ground that Fryer was looking for.
it does.
Now, he also revisits Biggs' 3P model.
Oh yes, the 3P.
How does that fit into this search for structure?
Biggs' 3P model, which stands for presage, process, and product, was another really important attempt to bring some order to how we understand student learning.
Okay.
It drew on ideas from systems theory.
Systems theory.
Yeah, suggesting that learning could be seen as a series of connected parts.
That's a systems.
Exactly. So you've got presage factors, which are the things students bring to the learning situation,
Okay.
like their prior knowledge, their motivation,
Right.
and then the teaching context itself.
So what the student brings in the environment.
Right.
Right.
Then you've got the process, which is how students actually engage with the learning tasks.
So the doing part.
Yeah, the actual learning.
Right.
And finally, the product, which is the learning outcomes.
So what they actually achieve.
Exactly the results.
Okay, so it's like a timeline
It is a
in
timeline.
the learning process.
From what you start with to how you go about it to what you end up with. Biggs himself said that eventually everything in the model influences everything else.
Interesting.
But Fryer points out that while the 3P model was a useful way to organize our thinking, it didn't fully achieve the goal of truly unifying different learning theories.
So it's a good starting point, but not the whole story.
Right.
What was missing?
It didn't really explain why those connections existed in the way they did. It was more of a descriptive framework than a truly explanatory theory.
It's like a map, showing all the places, but maybe without clear roads explaining how to get between them.
That's a great way to put it.
It shows the components, but not the underlying mechanisms.
Exactly.
Okay, so how does Fryer propose to bring this idea of perceived control together with the 3P model?
This is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, lay it on me.
Fryer suggests thinking about perceived control as a kind of lateral organization that you layer onto the 3P model's timeline.
Lateral organization.
Yeah, so imagine the 3P model as showing the sequence of learning events and perceived control as a lens through which we look at each of those stages.
A lens. Okay.
This helps us understand how changes in one part of the learning experience,
Okay.
whether it's what the student brings, how they study, or the results they get.
Okay.
They all relate to each other through the student's sense of control over their learning.
So perceived control becomes the underlying reason why the presage process and product stages are connected.
Exactly. It's the glue that holds it all together.
I like that.
Fryer uses a figure in his article to illustrate this.
A figure.
Yeah, it's a helpful visual.
Okay.
Let's think about how perceived control relates to each of the P components.
All right, let's do it.
Starting with presage, the factors students bring to learning.
Like their existing knowledge of the subject.
Exactly. Prior knowledge has a strong link to perceived control.
Okay.
If you already know a lot about a topic, you generally feel more in control of your ability to learn even more.
Makes sense. The more you know, the more confident you feel.
Right. Fryer connects this to self-efficacy.
That belief in your own abilities.
Right. Okay. To wanting to truly master the material and even to your interest in the subject.
So the more you know, the more interested you become.
Yeah, there's a connection there.
And this ties into the model of domain learning, right?
It does. Research in the MDL suggests that as your knowledge grows, so does your sense of control and your interest.
So it's a positive cycle.
It is.
What about the learning environment?
The learning environment. That's another key presage factor.
Yeah, and this is where the research on student approaches to learning really comes in.
It does.
Okay.
Aspects of the learning environment like clear course goals, well-organized teaching materials, helpful feedback from instructors.
Yeah, all the stuff that makes a good learning experience.
Right. A manageable workload, fair ways of assessing learning.
Okay.
All of that contributes to a student's perceived control.
So if the environment is well designed, students are more likely to feel in control.
Exactly.
But if it's chaotic and confusing.
that can really undermine their sense of control.
So the environment can either empower or disempower.
That's a good way to put it.
And then we have motivation.
Motivation.
Things like how confident students feel, how interested they are, the goals they set for themselves.
All important stuff.
Yeah. How does perceived control relate to motivation?
Fryer explains that perceived control both influences and is influenced by these motivational factors.
Okay, so it's a two-way street.
It is.
Okay.
For example, feeling more in control can boost your self-confidence,
Okay.
which then creates a positive cycle.
Oh, I see. So the more control you feel, the more confident you become, and the more confident you become, the more control you feel.
Right, it feeds on itself.
Okay, that's cool.
Similarly, learning environments that support a student's sense of control are more likely to encourage them to focus on mastering the material.
Okay.
And as we've discussed, growing competence leads to more control and interest.
So it all ties together.
That's it,
Okay,
yeah.
so perceived control is connected to all these initial factors, the presage stuff.
It is.
Now, how does it affect the process stage?
The process stage.
What students actually do when they're learning.
Right. The actual studying and learning.
How does perceived control play into that?
Here we see how both the model of domain learning and the student approaches to learning align with this idea of perceived control influencing learning strategies.
Okay.
The MDL suggests that having more knowledge and feeling more in control within a subject leads to deeper learning.
Deeper learning.
Yeah, more meaningful learning.
Okay.
SL, on the other hand, argues that a student's intention, which is influenced by how structured they perceive the learning environment to be,
Okay.
affects how deeply they process the information.
So both models are saying that perceived control leads to better learning strategies.
That's the key takeaway.
And what about self-regulated learning in this process stage?
SRL is all about students actively managing their own learning,
Right.
and that's fundamentally linked to control.
Okay.
A student's sense of control plays a big role in how they plan their learning, monitor their progress, and make adjustments as needed. So the more control they feel, the more they can self-regulate.
Exactly.
Okay.
Researchers like Shunk and Zimmerman have done a lot of work in this area.
Okay.
And Fryer also points to the work of Vermont on students' overall learning patterns,
Okay.
suggesting that whether a student tends to rely on themselves, external sources, or struggles with regulation likely reflects their underlying experiences of feeling in control, externally controlled, or lacking control.
So their overall approach to learning is shaped by their sense of control.
That's the idea.
Okay, and finally we have the product stage.
The product stage,
The outcomes, what students actually achieve.
the results.
Yeah, how does perceived control relate to that?
Fryer explains that when students experience success and develop greater competence, like getting better grades, acquiring new skills,
Right.
this naturally leads to an increased sense of perceived control.
Success breeds control.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then that sense of control feeds back and positively influences their future learning strategies.
So it's another positive cycle.
It is success builds confidence and a stronger sense of agency.
So it's all connected.
It is.
This is fascinating stuff.
It is.
So what are the bigger implications of using this idea of perceived control as a way to connect all these different models of learning?
The potential benefits are really significant.
Okay, like what?
First, it could help us better understand how different ideas from different models relate to each other,
Okay.
allowing us to see where they overlap and where they offer unique insights.
So it helps us see the big picture.
Exactly.
Okay.
For instance, the detailed understanding of how the learning environment affects students from the SEL research could inform other models like MDL and SRL.
So it's about cross-pollination between the models.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, what else?
Second, it might help bridge the gap between different ways of thinking about how students process information,
Okay.
like simply memorizing versus really understanding.
Right, two different approaches.
By showing how these different approaches relate to a student's sense of control as a way of coping with learning demands,
So it helps us see the common thread.
the underlying mechanism.
Okay.
Third, it could potentially connect how we look at learning at different levels.
Levels.
Yeah, from specific learning events to overall patterns of learning.
Okay, so bridging the micro and macro.
Exactly.
Okay.
Fourth, by focusing on the link between perceived control and how well students actually do it, might help us address some of the criticisms about whether current models are actually good at predicting learning outcomes.
So it could make the models more useful.
More accurate, more predictive.
Okay.
And perhaps most importantly in today's world, connecting research on learning in higher education to broader ideas in educational psychology
Okay.
allows us to learn from a wider range of educational settings, cultures, and age groups.
So we're not just stuck in the ivory tower.
Exactly.
We can learn from other contexts.
Which is really important as higher education adapts to embrace lifelong learning.
Right. Because learning doesn't stop after college.
It's a lifelong journey.
It is. Fryer does briefly mention other big picture theories, like self-determination theory and expectancy value theory.
Oh, yes. SDT and EVT.
Why does he, and therefore this deep dive, focus on perceived control in particular.
That's a great question.
Yeah, what makes perceived control so special?
Well, while theories like self-determination theory, which focuses on our needs for autonomy, connection, and competence,
Okay.
and expectancy value theory, which looks at how our beliefs about success and the value we place on tasks influence our motivation.
Right.
They both offer valuable insights.
They do.
But Fryer argues that perceived control is particularly well suited for the specific task of connecting these different models of motivated learning strategies.
All right.
He points out that self-determination theory's main focus is more on the needs for autonomy and connection rather than just competence.
Okay.
And some of its theoretical ideas are still debated.
So it's a bit more complex.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Expectancy value theory, while very comprehensive, isn't really built on a clear psychological continuum and is more focused on the choices we make related to achievement rather than being specifically centered on competence,
Okay.
which is at the heart of learning strategies.
So perceived control is a more direct fit for understanding how learning strategies work.
Exactly.
But Fryer does acknowledge that any single way of looking at things has its limitations.
He does.
Like what?
For example, focusing on perceived control might not fully capture the influence of what students value
Nope.
or certain aspects of the learning environment, like how much autonomy students are given and the quality of the relationship between teachers and students.
And there are other factors at play.
There always are.
Right.
This is just one piece of the puzzle,
One important piece.
a very important piece.
Okay, well, this has been a fascinating exploration of the world of learning theories.
It has.
Could you give us a final summary of the key takeaway from Fryer's article?
The main takeaway is that Fryer's work suggests that this feeling of perceived control, this basic sense of competence and agency we have, could be a really powerful way to connect the diverse ways we understand motivated learning in higher education.
It's that bridge we were talking about.
It is the bridge. It gives us a way to see how a student's background, the learning environment, how they go about learning, and what they ultimately achieve are all linked through their feeling of control over their own learning journey.
So it's a unifying framework.
Exactly.
Okay. And for you, our listener, the learner, how might understanding this idea of perceived control be useful in your own life?
By understanding this concept, you can gain a more joined-up view of what affects your own learning and your own motivation.
Okay.
You can start to think about times when you felt really in control of your learning, maybe when you had a strong foundation in the subject or when the instructions were really clear,
Okay.
and how that influenced how you approached your learning and the results you got.
Okay.
On the flip side, you can also reflect on times when you felt like you lacked control and what impact that had,
So it's about becoming more aware of your own learning process.
and how your sense of control plays into it.
Okay, that's really valuable.
It is.
To bring things to a close, what's one final thought-provoking question we can leave our listener with?
Think about your own learning experiences.
Okay.
When have you felt the strongest sense of control over your learning, and how did that specifically shape your approach and what you were able to achieve?
Okay.
Conversely, when have you felt a real lack of control, and what were the consequences of that feeling?
That's a great question for reflection.
It is.
And if our listener wants to dig even deeper into this, what areas would you suggest they explore further?
You might find it really interesting to look into the specific learning models we've talked about,
No.
SL-MDL and SRL,
Okay.
to see how each of them describes the different factors that influence learning. Also exploring the core psychological ideas of the need for competence and perceived control in broader psychology literature could offer even more in-depth understanding.
Fantastic. This deep dive into Fryer's work has given us a really insightful perspective on how we can connect different ideas about what drives us to learn.
It had
Thanks so much for guiding us through it.
my pleasure.
It's been a great conversation.